welcome back. This week on the Brain Warriors Way podcast, Tana and I are going to talk about change your brain, heal your mind. So the new PBS special that we just recorded last week. I was so excited to do that,
It was so
and
fun.
I made very few mistakes in
You
recording
did.
it.
It was like the best one we've done. You were great.
So it's filmed. It's going to come out nationwide in March. So we'll talk a little bit about some new information from the show. But before we do that, you have some reviews you want to read.
I do. I actually want to say thank you to Charlie Bannon, who took the time. Who does handwritten letters anymore? I got a 5-page personally handwritten letter from Charlie Bannon all the way from Ireland. How cool is that? So he writes this really amazing letter thanking us so much for the podcast because he said therapy didn't help him, but listening to the podcast every day completely changed his life. And coincidentally, or not coincidentally, I'm not exactly sure yet, he's a fellow martial artist. He practices Kempo, and he knows my master, Mr. White, and his master, Eddie Downey, I know. So, like, what a crazy small world it is. And the two things I wanted to point out about that, fill your mind with the right things, which he did. So, like, kudos to you, Charlie, and also your community. So his master, Eddie Downey, is an amazing human being. My master, Mr. White, an amazing human being. Our Kempo communities are just great communities. They do amazing things for people and they live in service. And when you have that community behind you and you're filling your mind with really good things will happen. So thank you for taking the time to write that. That's our payment. We often say that. It's makes us feel so good. So thank you, Charlie.
Wow.
Isn't that cool?
It is. Actually, there's a little summary of this. He grew up in a violent and abusive home and was suicidal from age 13. Our podcast was really important in his recovery when he found himself sliding back into depression after suffering from meningitis.
Mm-hmm.
The way we talk about finding purpose in our interviews with people who have found purpose despite life's challenges have really helped him. I'm just so grateful that this has been important to those of you who are listening.
It's so sweet. And I have to tell you, so we went to the John Maxwell. I have to like congratulate my husband. He won the John Maxwell Transformational Leadership Award. And we didn't really sort of realize how big this was going to be. We showed up and there's like 3,500 people there. It was an amazing event, huge. And it was a very special moment. And he was having his rock star moment and he was surrounded by people. And so I was sort of standing off over to the side. And this woman comes over to me and she had immigrated from somewhere in Africa. And she starts talking to me. And I thought oftentimes people will like the overflow. I'll get the overflow is what happens. They'll come talk to me since they can't reach you. And so I thought that's what was happening. And she came over and she was talking to me. And all of a sudden she tells me that she listens to our podcast all the time. And then she starts to tell me my life story. And I'm like, okay, that's a little weird, like literally in detail, my life story. And then she goes into specifics from books I've written, like all of my books, and then way back. And she's like, and I looked at her kind of funny and she said, oh no, I've been following you for much longer than your podcast. And I'm like, okay. And then she starts crying and she says, I pray every day that God will do for me what he did for you. And then I start crying. And I'm like, and she said, if she can do it, I can do it. And I started to bawl. And I thought, you know what? That is the purpose. And so this new book deal that I just recently signed, I've been very resistant about doing it, as you know. For the last couple of years, I've been resisting it. And that moment was one of those moments where I went, okay, it's worth it. If one person walks up to me like that, it's worth it.
You know, so many people feel shame for their life. And they think if only people really knew me, they wouldn't like me.
Spent my life thinking that up until 10 years ago.
And I've actually found that the opposite is true, that when you share your struggles, you become more human because the more perfect you are, the less people can relate to you.
Yeah, you told me that. I just didn't believe you. And then I discovered
But I
you
was
were right.
right.
You were
But I
right.
was right.
Yeah. Pain shared is pain divided. But that woman's tears and her saying, I pray every day that he'll do for me what he did for you was just like so powerful.
Wow.
So I just want to thank you
So
guys.
in this week, besides more reviews, and we'll answer some of your questions, I just want to share some of the ideas from Change Your Brain, Heal Your Mind. And the show is really based on my new book, The End of Mental Illness. But PBS was having trouble with the title. It so amazes me. So many people who've not read it, like they didn't read the script,
Right.
have trouble with the title. But when you understand the content, the title just makes perfect sense.
I think it's a great title.
That we are on the cusp of a new revolution that will change mental health care forever.
But I think what you're really saying is the end of mental illness is really the end of mental illness as we see it, as we treat it.
Right.
Right. And
the
it's
end
a
of
great
mental illness begins with a revolution in brain health.
Right.
And I got the best. I just have to share it with you because I haven't shared it with you. I got the best quote for my book. I already have 20, and the book isn't out until March. But this is from Daria Long, who's a physician, a national T-bird. Yeah, we had her on the show. She's the author of Mom Hacks, which we talked about. And she said, the world needs this book today more than ever. By reframing the discussion of mental health into one of brain health, Dr. Amen obliterates the concept that mental health issues are someone's fault or that they should just deal with it any differently than they would the flu or a broken arm. Most importantly, Dr. Amen gives everyone not just the permission, but the validation and hope to seek help for a better tomorrow. And
I love that.
Isn't that great?
Yeah, it's fantastic.
That's like one of the best reviews of any of my books ever. Mental illness affects us all. Either you've personally struggled with
It's
one,
so true,
or you love someone who has. No one escapes. And mental health problems are skyrocketing in our society with the deaths from drugs, alcohol, and suicide at their highest level in recorded history, despite the escalating use of psychiatric medications. Yeah, and I said this in the show, we are on the threshold of a new revolution that will change mental health care forever. Based on the 160,000 scans we've done, what we've discovered is these things aren't mental health issues at all.
You know, when I really got in, when I met you and got into what you do, what we do, the part that amazed me was how often when someone comes in and they're really, really struggling with mental health, like having a mental breakdown, and how often I've heard things like, oh, they had a thyroid condition. Oh, they had Lyme disease. Oh, and it was like a simpler fix than you would think. It wasn't a lifelong psychiatric battle.
Or they had mold exposure.
Well, just
or
the
they had
craziest
a head injury.
thing.
And if you see it through the lens of mental illness, then you'll give them drugs or
I'm a nurse.
Put them on psychotherapy.
That's what I saw.
Give them psychotherapy.
Yeah.
Without ever looking or taking care of the organ you treat. And people just don't get. The brain can have problems like your heart can have problems. Yet most people see a cardiologist have never had a heart attack. They're there to prevent them.
Right.
And I see a day
So smart.
when people will see brain health doctors, maybe not psychiatrists. You know, I'm always looking for another word for what I do because I'm not a traditional psychiatrist. I'm just not. I'm trained as one. I'm board certified in child and adult psychiatry. But I don't practice like my colleagues. So we need a new word. So those of you that are listening, if you give me a better word for what we do, you know, I don't know, a brain warriorist, brain warriorologist.
That's
If you give us a better word, I will sign Change Your Brain, Change Your Life, or The End
yeah.
of Mental Illness and send it to you.
I like that challenge.
To end mental illness, we must develop a similar way of thinking where we know your risk factors. That's what they do with heart disease. We know your risk factors and we attack each one of them. So, for example, if teenagers sleep just an hour less than their peers, they have a higher incidence of depression, anxiety, school failure, and suicide. So, we have to make sleep a priority. And of all things, light therapy can help. If you have gut problems, you have a higher incidence of anxiety and depression, brain fog. So you got to get your gut right. And it's like, wait a minute, I thought we were talking about the brain.
Right.
If you have Lyme disease, people can become angry, depressed, even psychotic. So if your mind's not right, somebody should at least be thinking about an infection. And when we come back, I'm going to talk about the whole concept of why the end of mental illness and the dedication of the show to my two nieces who were actually there at the taping. It was very
Your
special.
two nieces?
Our
Our nieces.
our nieces.
He stole my nieces.
Stay with us. And, is there one thing you've learned from this podcast? Please post it on any of your social media channels. And we would love for you to leave a review or a question at brainwarriorswaypodcast.com. And we'll enter you into a drawing for for free copy of Tana's book, The Brain Warriors Way Cookbook, which is just amazing. There is no suffering in getting well.
Welcome back. So we are talking about the end of mental illness, and just how proud I am of you after the taping of the show. It was so awesome. So
Well,
much fun.
Thank you.
And how you hijacked my nieces.
Well, our nieces
Right.
were in the audience, and Change Your Brain, Heal Your Mind's the name of the show, but it's based on my book, The End of Mental Illness. And people go, oh, that's a huge promise. So let me tell you why it's called The End of Mental Illness. About 3.5 years ago, we got a call from Child Protective Services saying that our two nieces were taken into foster care.
So can I back up and tell the prelude to that? The call I got from my sister driving down. I got a crazy call from my sister driving down. She was driving from out of state, and it was a scary call. I actually tried to get her to pull over and go to a hospital. She was terrified of something. I didn't know if she was on substances or not, but she was very, very scared. She was driving in a state she shouldn't have been driving, a mental state she shouldn't have been driving in. And she knew that.
That was California, or?
No, mental, yes. Yes,
Sorry.
Exactly. And so I think she knew that Child Protective Services they were going to come take the kids. And so she shouldn't have been driving. She was so upset. I couldn't even understand her. It was that bad. And you shouldn't be driving when you're like that. And the next call we get was that they had taken the kids. They actually came from Oregon to California, which they are not supposed to do. But they came and they took the kids after she was in a stable environment. And so it was terrifying. It was awful. And we couldn't get a hold of them. We couldn't talk to them for weeks. We couldn't actually speak to them.
And Alize actually had tried to contact you.
Right. And I didn't know it because it went into like.
So at the time, the kids were 6 and 11, and they're completely terrified. And as we understand the story, these children are loaded for mental illness. They have a genetic family history of suicides, multiple suicides, schizophrenia, drug abuse, anxiety, depression, criminal behavior, addiction. But, as we've often said on this show, genes only load the gun. It's what happens to us that pulls the trigger. And that's not good for them either. They were raised in chaos. With parents who struggled with addiction, depression, domestic violence. The kids had multiple moves, multiple schools. Life was unpredictable and very stressful, to say the least. And then they're taken by Child Protective Services, where yet more traumas occurred.
That was awful.
And at the time, you and your sister were estranged from each other because of
all the chaos,
because of the addiction.
Yeah.
And we'd actually never met the little one. And
I saw her when she was a few months old.
I had never met her. And we knew we must act at the time. And so our choices were, we could have excluded the parents and just taken in the children. But what we decided, because we were thinking long term, is we would wrap services around the mother, get involved with Child Protective Service and their case, and through scanning mom, finding out she had the Irlen syndrome, she'd actually been in 19 car accidents, getting a handle, helping her get a handle on her addiction. 6 months later, on Mother's Day, 2017, she got the kids back. And the whole idea behind the end of mental illness is, how do I end it in them? How do you and I? Because it takes a family for sure.
It takes a village.
Yeah. How do we end mental illness in these girls? And just as importantly, how do we end it in their babies and their grandbabies? And that's what this show is about. That's what the end of mental illness is about. So when I see it that way, I don't have a problem at all with the title, because it's a huge aspirational goal. And I have a plan for it that I share about in the book. And it's basically what we tell you every week in the Brain Warriors way. With the program, the girls are happy, A student, social, no longer addicted to hot Cheetos. You should have seen that first grocery trip we went on with them, where we took them to the store and we went, we don't spend money on food that will hurt you.
I have to tell you, there's one story that is so funny. So these girls are used to being scrappy and surviving, right? So when there were times they were like living pretty lean, let's put it that way. I'll just like leave it at that. So they've figured out ways to survive. So the older one went to school. She would take the little bit of money she had, which was very little. She would take whatever little bit of lunch money she had. She would buy a bag of Cheetos out of the vending machine and sell it for twice as much as she bought it for. Go buy 2 more, sell them for twice as much as she bought them for. And she was making money doing this. I'm like, you're a drug dealer. What are you doing? So we had to nip that.
So I was impressed at her entrepreneurial.
Yeah, she's very much an entrepreneur. It's hilarious.
So we were putting their bodies in a healing environment. So what issues run in your family? I want you to think about that. Plenty of anxiety in my family, and I was a pretty anxious kid. Looking back on it, there are big issues in your family with addiction and depression, and a grandmother that really struggled. We think probably with PTSD.
Yeah, I'm sure of it.
What she grew up in, and then forced menopause when she was young, where they just didn't take her uterus.
Full hysterectomy.
They had a total hysterectomy.
Give any replacement.
Right. So in the show, I basically talk about 6 practical steps to end mental illness. But before we get to those, there's this concept that you're going to hear me talk about a lot for the next 10 years. If I was an evil ruler, how would I create mental illness in America? Because if we know how they're created, we can develop strategies to prevent them. Or if I was a good ruler, and here for the show, we used an image of Tana as a superhero because mothers.
I have a cape and everything.
Mothers are the superheroes in our families. I mean, they're clearly the health leaders, and we see that with the Brain Warriors Way. You know, they're the brain warrior generals, if you will, which is why men who are married live longer than men who aren't married.
Yeah.
But women who are married do not live as long
because
they're dealing with the men.
Unless you're married to someone like you.
And so, for example, a good ruler strategy would be to create a nationwide brain health campaign, because the end of mental illness begins with brain health. An evil ruler strategy is continue with the creation of addictive social media apps that make everyone else's life look amazing, and yours looks terrible by comparison. It's this terrible comparison society that we're in. So step number one, eliminate the term mental illness and call these things what they really are: brain health issues that steal your mind. Mental illness, it just stains everyone diagnosed, making them less likely to seek help when these are our brain imaging work clearly said these are brain health issues that steal your mind. When we come back, we're going to talk about 2 through 6. What did you learn? Did you learn anything? Post it on any of your social media channels. Leave a review. Please leave questions for us. We love answering your questions at brainwarriorswaypodcast.com. Welcome back. We're talking about change your brain, heal your mind, aka the end of mental illness. And do you have a review you want to read?
I couldn't do anything about my adult child's addiction other than finally getting out of the way and let God work. But I could step in for my granddaughter to find a way to help her combat bullying and sexual harassment. Because of life's events and the emotional abandonment of both her parents to destructive tendencies, she carried a victim mentality. I am a seeker, and using that, God brought to me the right people, Tana and Dr. Amen being 2 of them, to help heal my life so I can help her. That's where I found my purpose. Nancy Beer. Isn't that awesome? That just touched me because we're just talking about that with our nieces and helping when you can. And my book being The Reluctant Healer.
It's so helpful. So we've been talking about the book and the show, and step number 1 to ending mental illness is we have to stop calling these things mental illness and call them what they really are: brain health issues that steal your mind. No one is shamed for cancer, diabetes, or heart disease. No one should be shamed for bipolar disorder, ADHD, depression, schizophrenia.
And yet, it affects your insurance. It affects your ability, like certain jobs. It affects so many things.
So if you diagnose them with a brain health issue and you don't write down the code, now they may not get reimbursed because you have to have codes to get you have to have diagnostic codes. But when you get a diagnosis of depression, it can affect your life insurance, your long-term care insurance, your disability insurance.
So messed up.
Sometimes health insurance. So no one is shamed. But if we don't fix this stigma, we're going to have continued problems. Suicide went up 33% since 1999. Well, cancer declined 27%. Why? We're working on the wrong paradigm. Seeing these things as mental rather than brain hurts people because, mental is like, well, what is that? It's your fault. It's vague, it's hard to define, and it sort of means, well, you should be able to snap out of it. But when you went through your period of depression because they took away your thyroid, you couldn't snap out of
No.
it. You would have given anything to snap out of it.
Right. Instead, they
Right?
made it worse
Instead, they made it worse.
by putting me on the wrong medication.
Right. And in the show, I talk about Jared, who was hyperactive, restless, impulsive, aggressive, diagnosed with ADD from the time he was small. And 5 meds didn't work, made him worse. And when we saw him, he had the ring of fire. And it's like, please don't stimulate this brain. And there's a fun part in the show where I talk about if Jared had lived in the past, how would they have treated him? From drilling a hole in his skull to release the evil spirits in ancient times,
Yeah.
to putting him in an asylum, to sterilizing him, to putting him on Freud's couch, to giving him electric shock therapy, to the constant medication that they tried on him. We can do better when we see the brain as an organ that needs to be treated. And so step number 1, we've got to get rid of the term mental illness. Step number 2 is you need to fall in love with your brain. I mean, what a concept, right? Freud was
pretty
wrong.
simple.
Penis envy is not the cause of anybody's problem. I've not seen one case in 40 years of being a psychiatrist. The only time I saw a case of penis envy was when I was at Broadway and it was the intermission and the girls' line was like around the building.
Yes.
And the boys'
Then you have
line.
penis envy. Yes,
there
I
was
understand.
nobody in the boys' bathroom.
No one's avoiding. So unfair.
So you have to fall in love with your brain. And once you fall in love with it, you treat it better. And that's just absolutely critical. Step 3 is preventing or treating the 11 major risk factors that steal your mind. And those of you that listen to the Brain Warriors Way podcast know we have a mnemonic, bright minds, and, blood flow, retirement and aging, inflammation, genetics, head trauma, toxins. You have to go after those things. So a large part of the show was that. And there's so many great stories. And step number 4 is first do no harm. Use the least toxic, most effective treatments, head to head against antidepressants. Exercise is equally effective. Omega-3 fatty acids have a better effect than antidepressants. Learning not to believe every stupid thing you think.
Yeah. It's all common sense. It's so funny. Do you know what's so funny? When I was at the gym, so I used to work out at 4 o'clock in the morning. I used to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning. I was at the gym by 5. And there's this whole group of people that are always there at the same time. They're like the morning people that are always there. Do you know what they all say? Like, we have one thing in common. I don't feel normal if I don't work out first thing in the morning. It's like a medicine. You just feel it. So if everybody would do that when they don't feel right?
Maybe not at 4 o'clock in the morning. But exercise
it's because
for
we
you,
start our day that way.
You are so much more normal
And nice.
when you exercise and you're not hangry.
Right.
So when you have a low blood sugar,
It's not good.
I give you grace.
Yeah.
And nuts.
And nuts. Yes. Lots of nuts.
So first, do no harm. Use the least toxic, most effective treatments. Think skills, not just pills. And I talked about how as a society, we're nutrient deficient. Magnesium, choline, omega-3s, vitamins B, C, D, E, potassium.
Someone asked, this is such an important point, the nutrient deficiency. Someone asked at the taping, if I eat a really clean diet, do I really have to take supplements? And it's a really good question. Here's the problem. Everyone thinks, well, I'm just going to eat clean. Well, number one, most people don't eat that clean. In this society, they just don't. Let's be honest. Now, if you're one of those really ultra clean foodies, right? You're eating raw food, you're eating enough protein, you're eating the right balance of fat, protein, fiber. Okay, but one of the things that I brought up in that question was, it's not just food that is depleting us of our nutrients, okay? It's the environmental toxins. It's not sleeping enough. It's stress. There's a whole, it's our lifestyle in general.
Pollution.
The environmental toxins. So it's all of those things that are depleting medication, birth control, statins, like so many different medications will deplete you of nutrients. That's why we recommend taking that buffer. It's the thing that bridges that gap.
And I also talked about the scientific evidence for things like magnesium, GABA, and theanine for anxiety, or green tea, zinc, and rhodiola for focus. In the End of Mental Illness, there's a whole chapter on mind meds versus nutraceuticals. And what does the science say? There's 286 scientific references. This book is the best referenced book I've ever done, except for Memory Rescue, because both of those books have over 1,000 references, because I just get so irritated when people go, oh, there's no science behind his work. It's like, do you read? And then there was a really fun thing about, well, before you take medicine for anxiety, what are 6 other things you can do? And at some point, that would actually be worth a whole podcast by itself.
Is psychedelics on there?
No.
Just had to ask. It's one of the questions.
Marijuana is not on there. LSD is not on there.
That was actually one of the questions.
Ketamine is not on there. Step number 5 was get the whole family involved.
Community.
And, that was just absolutely critical for Amelie and Alize
Our
and
nieces.
Tamara.
Yeah.
And there's this really funny line in the show that I liked. If you spend time with people who have ants, and all of you know what ants are, automatic negative thoughts. If you spend time with people who have ants, your ants will mate with their ants, and you'll create mutant ants infesting the relationship with negativity. And that's why when you and I first got together, I took you to a Byron Katie conference, just so that we have clean thinking.
My first 2 gifts from you: going to meet Byron Katie and 10 sessions of EMDR. And I'm like, you think I'm really screwed up.
No, I thought you were amazing. I loved you, love you. I just wanted you to have good programming, given that you had a fair amount of trauma when you were young. So
I thought I was fine, fouled up, insecure, neurotic, and emotional.
It was a gift to our relationship.
Oh, for sure.
Which is, 14 years, you are the best thing that ever happened to me.
Vice versa.
So 5 is really about family support. And 6 is you got to get started today. Tomorrow never comes. People go, oh, I'll start tomorrow. And it's like, no, tomorrow never comes. Anyways, I hope you look forward to when the show comes out. We'll talk about the book a lot between now and March when it comes out. But I think it's the best thing I've ever written.
You've written some really good books.
I know, but nothing.
You remind me of
quite
John
like
Maxwell now.
Well, thank you.
No, I literally, as soon as I heard him say, every time he's writing a book, it's the best book he's ever written, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's you completely. Because he's in love with
if you
whatever
learn
he's writing.
something, please post it on any of your social media channels. Go to brainwarriorswaypodcast.com. Leave questions for us. We'll try to answer them. We're going to do that in the next podcast. Leave a review. We would love that too. We're so grateful you're a part of our Brain Warrior community. You're the reason we do this. Welcome back. Questions and answers. So you have questions. We hope we're going to have answers.
What have we got?
Hi, Dr. Daniel and Tana Amen. I would like to ask you 2 questions. This is from Natty. I tend to be slow in processing, reading texts. I was wondering what supplement do you recommend that can help improve cognitive performance, quick thinking for university students? 2 of ours that I like Focus and Energy a lot. It has green tea.
I like that one.
Ginseng, rhodiola and ashwagandha. And it really can help people with focus. And I also like Brain and Memory Power Boost. Both of those are good. And I like Brain Boost on the go.
Yeah.
So if I get sort of sleepy in the afternoon, Brain Boost on the go, 100% of the time for me picks me up.
Yeah.
The second question, what supplements are helpful to take before and after surgery to help protect the brain from the damaging effects of anesthesia?
Oh, that's a good one.
That's a great
So the
question.
interesting thing about that one is they recommend you stop taking most of the ones that are really good for you. So you have to stop them for a while. So take them like as long as you can before. Stop taking some of them, and then you have to start taking them as soon as you can after surgery.
Yeah, so the ones I like, Brain and Memory Power Boost, or our Bright Minds powder, which actually has all the nutrients you need except omega-3 fatty acids. And they'll probably not want you to take omega-3s
Especially
right before
not in the doses that most of
surgery.
us take them.
But, 2 or 3 days afterwards, they're fine to restart. But I like our Bright Minds powder.
So supplements that most doctors won't want you taking before surgery are things like fish oil, ginkgo, vitamin E. There's a lot of them. There's a big list. Anything that thins the blood or sort of coats the cells. But you can take them up to usually like a week, sometimes 2 weeks before surgery. And then after surgery, you want to really ramp it up so you get back on track.
Another question from Matthew. Can your brain type change over time? The reason I ask is because I took it about 3 months ago and was a type 11, which is sort of like overfocused and anxious. And now I'm a type 1, which is balanced. And when I took it again, good for you.
Yeah.
I would say you're going in the right direction for sure.
So my question is, what have you been doing? You must be doing something right.
And hopefully you're listening to the Brain Warriors Way podcast.
And so to answer that, yes, it can change if you're doing something different. Obviously, if you hit your head, it's going to change in a negative way. If you're doing all the right things and you're eating correctly and sleeping and meditating and taking your supplements, it's going to change in a positive way.
And that was Matthew from Salt Lake, Utah. This is from Catherine from Rollo, North Dakota. We have a lot of folks in North Dakota. From Catherine, I would love to get your feedback on bulimia. My sister has struggled with this disorder for about 6 years and has just now finally gone to a doctor for a prescription to help with her anxiety, which accompanies it. I am unsure how to help other than being supportive and saying, we'll try again tomorrow. I haven't found many good resources online to offer assistance either. So bulimia is an impulsive, compulsive disorder. People compulsively eat or sometimes exercise. And so but there's also an impulsive component because they don't want to do it, and they give in to behavior they don't want to do and find that they can't stop. What we see is high activity in the basal ganglion cingulate. It's that sort of they get stuck on it, and low activity in a part of their frontal lobe, so they have trouble controlling their behavior. One of my favorite bulimia stories is of a woman that actually had it under control and then worked all day, didn't have time to eat, went out to a bar with her friends and had nachos and then alcohol. So it was alcohol and then nachos. And the reason she binged on the nachos, even though she didn't want to, is she didn't eat all day. So she went to the bar with low blood flow, low blood sugar, which goes with low blood flow. And then she had a drink, which lowered her frontal lobes further, causing her to eat the nachos. Then she couldn't stop, and then she made herself throw up. And so whenever someone has a relapse, I want you to be curious about what happened, never furious and judgmental. And as we sort of took it apart, we went, oh, you have to eat 3 times a day to manage your blood sugar. And without the alcohol, so the alcohol was the trigger event for her.
So I have a question, because you know how you say depression is not one thing? My thought is, wouldn't it be true? Wouldn't that be the same with something like eating disorders, especially something like bulimia? Because one thing I know from different women I've known that have it, they describe it very differently. For some women, it's something it's a behavior they can't stop, and it has to do with their body image. For other women, it's not as much about their body image. It's more about like what she described, an anxiety control. It's like a pressure cooker building, and they're releasing that pressure, they're releasing that anxiety. And I know even for myself, when I was young and I started to feel that build of pressure, that build of anxiety, I found exercise. And I had a doctor tell me I was an exercise bulimic. I'm like, a what? I'm a what? Because I wasn't purging. But he's like, you are purging. You're purging through exercise. So my question is, can it be different through?
Absolutely. And that's why you have to look. If you don't look, you don't know.
Right.
So we hope you've really liked this week. We're going to answer more of your questions coming up. So go to brainwarriorswaypodcast.com and leave reviews. We love those. Leave questions. And, some of you may notice we actually changed the format of the podcast a bit when you give us your feedback in a kind way. Also, what did you learn in this podcast? Post it on any of your social media sites. Thanks for listening.
If you're enjoying the Brain Warriors Way podcast, please don't forget to subscribe so you'll always know when there's a new episode. And while you're at it, feel free to give us a review or 5-star rating, as that helps others find the podcast.
If you're considering coming to Amen Clinics or trying some of the brain healthy supplements from BrainMD, you can use the code podcast10 to get a 10% discount on a full evaluation at amenclinics.com, or a 10% discount on all supplements at brainmdhealth.com. For more information, give us a call at 855-978-1363.